The war with Iran, lopsided as ever, except for the Strait of Hormuz, where vessels carrying oil and natural gas remain paralyzed. President Trump wants help to reopen it. So far, lots of tankers, but no takers. What is up at the FBI? Agents fired, priorities shifted. Is it political? The former head of the Washington field office joins us with his perspective. And the great Bob Crawford, Avett Brothers bass player, popular podcaster, and now author. What you need, really need to know about John Quincy Adams. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. There are increasing signs the war with Iran isn't really a war at all, not in the sense of two sides squaring off and slugging it out. It is as lopsided as ever, with U.S. and Israeli fighter jets running sorties and bombing runs with almost no resistance. Thousands upon thousands of targets have been struck, and yet President Trump wants help. Not with the war writ large, the one targeting Iranian infrastructure. He wants help with what war analysts call the asymmetric part of this conflict. Asymmetric warfare is when weaker combatants use non-conventional means to increase the cost of war. Yes, Iran fires off missiles and drones, but it's threats to attack vessels in the Strait of Hormuz that have really caused problems by effectively closing that waterway, rattling, as I'm sure you have heard, global oil markets. Trump wants other nations not currently involved in this war to join the effort to escort vessels carrying oil and natural gas through the strait, even if it means becoming a target of an Iranian mine, rocket-propelled grenade, or drone. So far, no sail. And so the strait remains largely strangled. And the damage from this conflict, well, it might be spreading asymmetrically. This afternoon, a drone attack triggered a fire at the Shah oil field in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. The Shah oil field is one of the world's largest. No casualties were reported, but the fire is a worrisome sign, possibly, of things to come. Also late today came reports of Katyusha rockets fired toward the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. The Israelis and the United States own the skies. That is true. But Iran and its proxies still apparently have the means to harass, destabilize, and complicate. For how long and to what effect? The White House and Israel can't tell, or if they can tell, aren't saying. Much of the world is still trying to stay on the sidelines, even as Trump beckons them closer to the fight. Thus begins the third week of the war, with timelines and objectives in flux. For the latest, we turn to Imtiaz Tayeb, who joins us from Doha, Qatar. Imtiaz, I know this is a fast-moving situation. Catch us up on the latest you know.
Major, I hate to correct you on air. I'm actually in Ras Al Khaimah. I am literally on the banks of the Strait of Hormuz, which has become this front line on this conflict between the U.S. and Iran. And it is extraordinary to be here. You know, a few years ago, I was in Iran and I was given access to the Strait of Hormuz from the Iranian side. It was incredibly rare access. And when we went out on the boat that we were on and looked out to the sea, it was extraordinary, not only because you could see these enormous tankers which carry hundreds of millions of dollars of crude just in one vessel, but it was extraordinary because of how narrow this choke point is. I could see Oman, I could see the UAE where I am now. And the reality is that in this moment, we are really on the front line of this conflict. As you said in your introduction, President Trump wants to open this choke point where 20% of the world's oil, around 20% of the world's LNG, and the components that make fertilizer, so the world's food, comes through this area, has effectively ground to a halt, completely stopped. And he wants to get that started again, looking for international partners to do so. But that hasn't happened. And Iran is saying that, look, American vessels, anything connected to the U.S., that can't go through, but other vessels can. But we haven't seen that happen either in any meaningful way. And it's really just a sign of how Iran, despite being militarily, strategically much weaker than the U.S. and Israel, still has some strength, and it's showing it just behind me in the Strait of Hormuz.
Based on that experience you had, MTS, and trust me, you can correct me anytime I get something as fundamental as your location wrong. So please don't hesitate there. But you've been there. I haven't been there. My audience hasn't been there. Help us visualize the enormity of the tankers, the closeness, the narrowness of this strait, how easily accessible from a rocket-propelled grenade or a drone any harassment from the Iranian side could be.
That is such an important and vital question. You know, we talk about the Strait of Hormuz, but just to give our viewers a sense of just the geography of this place, the reality is that this narrow choke point, and it is a choke point, is only a few miles wide. And the reason it's so important is we have to remember we are in the Gulf, right? Like, this is where Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other countries, which are some of the world's most prolific producers of oil and natural gas, produce this stuff and then send it on tankers through the Persian Gulf into the Strait of Hormuz and then onwards into global markets. And it is this tiny choke point, which happens to be on the banks of Iran, that Iran is using as a weapon. It is using it as a weapon to essentially grind this economy, grind this system which has been in place for so long and which has been so lucrative in place. And from the Iranian point of view, just by way of explanation, not justification, by explanation, from the Iranian point of view, they have decided that this war that they're experiencing with the US and Israel is one of survival. And so they are going to do anything they can in order to survive this. And that means choking off the Strait of Hormuz. That means targeting their neighbors, including here in the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, you name it, some of these countries which they have close diplomatic ties with, because they feel if they can inflict economic damage on these countries, on the world, on the US, it might make the US and potentially Israel think twice about ever targeting them again. It is a gamble, but it is a gamble that they are willing to put forward as they try to survive this war, which they are militarily losing quite badly. Major.
Vivid reporting from where this story is happening. MTS Tayeb, thank you very, very much. CBS News national security contributor Joe Zaks joins me now. He previously served as CIA Deputy Assistant Director for Counterterrorism. Always good to have you. Let me just run some statistics by you. 7,000 targets struck, 6,500 U.S. combat flights, 100 or more Iranian vessels damaged or destroyed. That's the stats. Is that statistical analysis telling us everything we need to know about what this war is or isn't accomplishing?
Well, thank you very much, Major. First of all, I have to compliment your correspondent in his previous segment. I thought he got it just absolutely right. The stats are impressive, and it tells a story of the U.S. military being able to really inflict incredible damage on the Iranian military. So conventionally, we're doing exceptionally well. I think we're looking very hard right now at prosecuting the IRGC command and control targets, their personnel and their facilities, both of the IRGC and the besieged. But I think what you're seeing here is that the Iranians really understand that their strategic sweet spot is twofold. Number one, the Strait of Hormuz, choking it off and really choking the world economy in many ways. And that's going to get progressively worse over time if left unchecked. And secondly, the constant threat, particularly against the GCC countries, their neighbors. Now, that could backfire on them ultimately when this conflict comes to an end. But in the meantime, it's very disruptive, and it's all aimed at trying to pressure the United States in particular in stopping this confrontation and arriving at some kind of agreement that is in the Iranian interests. I don't see that necessarily happening, but strategically, that's exactly what they're trying to do. And it is, in fact, an indication that they see themselves very much in an existential struggle.
And MTS said that from the Iranian perspective, this is a battle for survival. Does that
That's right.
Is that what it looks like to you? Do these tactics look like something consistent with a regime that is on its back heels considerably and is simply trying to survive?
I think that's exactly right. That's what we're seeing right now. They've really been dealt devastating blows to their military, and in many ways, it'll have ripple effects on their economy. So this is all about survival.
And trying to create a pressure point on America's friends that is intolerable for them with the hope that it becomes intolerable for the United States and Israel. That's a big risk, but it's the only one it seems like they've got left.
Yeah, I think you have it exactly right, Major. And it's very disappointing, in fact, from a U.S. perspective, to see close American allies in NATO and in Asia right now that are not necessarily rapidly agreeing to what President Trump has asked them to step up and do, which ultimately is in their interests in many ways more so than ours. They are affected, especially in Asia, by the Strait of Hormuz being choked off, both in terms of oil and in terms of fertilizer and other products that transit through the strait. So the president's request makes a lot of sense. But strategically, to see this discord between the United States and some of its key allies at this particular moment has got to be very gratifying and satisfying to the Iranian regime. That's not a place I would argue that we want to be in.
Joe Zaks, always appreciate your perspective, sir. Thank you very much. We turn now to the White House, where we find my colleague, good friend, Ed O'Keefe. So rhetorically, it was a kind of choose-your-own-adventure day at the White House. That's often true, Ed, but even by President Trump standards, there was a lot to digest today.
Oh, yes, there was, Major. Whether it was details of the Kennedy Center renovation, it will indeed close now for 2 years. Whether it was discussions of a congressman's ill health that apparently was brought back to better health by White House physicians who were deployed to help him out. Whether it was concerns about members of the Kennedy Center board bringing their wives to this meeting this afternoon. Or let's get to the more urgent and important matter of the war in Iran and the president's calls, as Joe was just calling out there, to various European and Asian countries, please come help us secure the Strait of Hormuz. But the reaction of much of the world so far is either you haven't officially asked us or no, we didn't start this war. In essence, Europe is saying, Germany especially, but some other countries as well, are essentially saying to the United States, you broke it. We're not helping you fix it, and don't come looking to us necessarily to help fix this problem. That led the president to then lash out at NATO allies again, suggesting that they're not holding up their end of the bargain. But a handful of them turned around throughout the course of today and said, this is not a NATO issue. This is not a North Atlantic treaty obligation. This is another part of the world that would require a new partnership, a new alliance of willing countries to work together to put back together what was the economic and logistical norm of flowing petroleum through the Strait of Hormuz.
And there was an attack the president brought notice to over the weekend, Karg Island, which is important to Iran's infrastructure and the way by which it moves oil to the rest of the world. And the president has menaced that part of that island, that is to say the oil-producing part, but hasn't hit it yet. This seems to be one of the chess pieces on the board.
It does, because, but the issue there would be, again, if you hit that and if you try to occupy it, then you've got to defend it. And that will require potentially deploying military personnel onto the island, or at least encircling it with enough military assets to keep it secure so that Iran can't get it back, because it is from that spot, essentially, that all of its petroleum gets exported. And so if you control that position, you are then potentially choking off Iran itself further back from the Strait of Hormuz at the top of the Persian Gulf. But again, is that an option he wants to take on? If it is, then it's prolonging potentially the conflict. And he had suggested at one point over the weekend, we're not there yet. We haven't made that decision. And we'll see if and when he does.
Ed O'Keefe, North Lawn of the White House. Thank you. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder joins me now. Dr. Gounder is also the editor-at-large for public health at KFF Health News. Dr. Gounder, Susie Wiles is a historic figure, the first female White House chief of staff. Now she's the first female White House chief of staff to be diagnosed with breast cancer and decide to work through the treatment while carrying on that incredibly taxing job. Evaluate what we learned today.
Well, I think a key point here is that what we heard is that she has breast cancer that is in its early stages, which generally means it's stage 2 or lower. So early stage breast cancer is going to be far more treatable than a later stage, say, stage 4 breast cancer. And I think it's important to remember that breast cancer is one of the most common cancers among women in this country. 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer in their lifetimes. And the treatments for breast cancer have gotten much better over the last couple decades, which means that it is easier for women to continue to keep an active lifestyle, to continue working despite going through treatment.
Even if you have a job as round the clock as chief of staff to a round the clock president of the United States, as President Trump quite evidently is.
Yes, that's right. And it really will depend on what kind of breast cancer she has. So most women will undergo surgery as the first step. But then after that really depends on the biology of the cancer. So we figure that out by doing a biopsy. We see if it's responsive to hormones like estrogen, whether proteins like HER2 are driving the breast cancer growth. So some women might get radiation, some women might get chemotherapy, others hormone therapy, or even immunotherapy. So treatments that leverage the immune system to fight the cancer. And so what kind of side effects she might deal with really depends on the details of her treatment.
And as you well know, Dr. Gounder, diagnoses like these create a whole new arc of conversation, which has downstream benefits of its own.
I think that's right, because it does raise awareness. It raises awareness about needing to get screened. It also raises awareness that your coworker may be contending with a diagnosis like this and working through it, and just showing a bit more compassion for those of us in the workplace.
Dr. Celine Gounder, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. We're now more than a month into what people call a partial government shutdown, but it is a very specific shutdown. Department of Homeland Security. The result? Doesn't have any funding. Roughly 61,000 TSA workers are not getting paid. Hundreds have called out sick from work, taking side jobs so they can pay their bills, make ends meet. And it's leading to significant delays at airports for Americans flying every day for leisure or for business. The CEOs of 10 U.S. airlines wrote a letter to Congress this weekend urging Congress to pass a proposal that would pay these federal workers impacted by this shutdown. CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small joins me from Capitol Hill. Torian, I want to play for you something I know you're familiar with, but the audience isn't. So lots of lawmakers meet each other catching flights back to Washington. Democrat Greg Casar of Texas ran into Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, at an airport, and this is what happened.
Senator, I was hoping that we
Why
could.
don't you tell your Democrats to vote to pay these poor
Let's
people?
do it. Let's do it.
No,
Why don't
you do it.
No, we don't
I
have to
voted
you don't have
for
to
it
yell at
time
me.
and time
You don't have to
again.
yell at me. Let's go. Let's talk for a second, Senator.
No,
There's a
you-
bipartisan bill to fund just the TSA. Can we do that together?
Not acceptable.
Not acceptable to
You
fund
want to
just
fund?
the TSA.
How about all the terrorist attacks like we've seen down on 6th Street?
Let's-
You want those to continue? These people are keeping us safe. Tell the Democrats to vote for funding the DHS.
Let's talk about each one. Would you fund the TSA?
What you call a unsuccessful congressional legislative negotiation. Torian, where are we?
Yeah, well, it seems negotiations aren't going far outside of those confrontations that we're seeing play out during those scrums, those informal scrums that we saw at the airport there, sometimes during the halls of Congress. We saw what happened last Wednesday on the Senate floor, this confrontation between Leader John Thune and Senator Pat Murray, a Democrat. She put forth a proposal that would see those agencies funded, and that's something that Thune shut down. Republicans aren't willing to lose leverage here by giving Democrats what they believe Republicans want, which is funding for those agencies outside of ICE and CBP until those reforms are guaranteed. But Republicans are also saying, look, we already got funding for ICE and CBP in the One Big Beautiful Bill. That'll last through 2029. So really, this is a futile effort. And in their minds, Democrats don't really have as much of leverage as they think they have in these negotiations. What happens this week, we'll see. We know that Republicans are likely to bring back to the floor the DHS bill again. But as of now, Democrats are unwilling to budge on that, Major.
Torian Small, Capitol Hill, thank you very much. Still to come on the Takeout, I'm joined by the FBI official who was fired by the Trump administration after he led the investigation into January 6th. David Sundberg gives us his thoughts on the current state of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Also, why credit bureaus are increasingly dismissing more and more legitimate consumer complaints, and that's having an effect on their credit ratings. All this happening in Trump 2.0. We are joined by a ProPublica reporter to discuss his brand new reporting. Plus, America's Founding Son, the new biography that dubs John Quincy Adams America's original political maverick. You want to hear that? The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Since retaking the presidency, Donald Trump and his administration have purged the Justice Department and some law enforcement agencies of career officials. And those career officials, having been fired, believe they were terminated for what appears to them to be very political reasons. One of them, David Sundberg, he served in the FBI for more than 20 years. He was once in charge of the Washington field office and led the probe into the January 6th Capitol riot. I spoke with Sundberg this afternoon. Please take a listen. How would you characterize the current state of the FBI?
Unfortunately, I think some of the capabilities have been depleted. There are less personnel, but additionally, there's a loss of expertise. And I think we are seeing that from both the working conditions in the FBI and also the removal of agents and analysts simply because they were assigned to a case that Director Kash Patel thinks is politically disadvantaged.
And walk my audience through that, because line agents don't have any choice of what they're assigned, and yet they have been purged because they were assigned to something over which they had no control.
That's correct. Yeah. Line agents do not choose the cases they work on. The FBI covers a lot of different violations to keep the nation safe, especially on the national security side. And they build over their careers and expertise in certain types of investigations, but they certainly don't choose their cases. And in this time, we have had many agents and now some analysts who were expert in their field removed from the FBI, fired without any sort of due process. And the result is that we are now in a conflict with Iran, and we've lost experts inside the FBI who both had the expertise as well as the connectivity across the intelligence community to combat threats of Middle Eastern espionage and other attempts to, affect the U.S.
Are we in more danger as a result of this purge than we otherwise would have been?
Well, we certainly have less people who know how to find those threats as far away as possible so we can interdict them before they're here. And the Iranian government has shown itself to be a threat of exporting terrorism. It's been, obviously, has a terrible human rights record with its own people, but it also has significant cyber capabilities and counterintelligence. We fight it as counterintelligence. Their foreign intelligence officers are always trying to penetrate the United States, and we've lost some of the people who were experts in that work.
You mentioned at the beginning that there are people who were purged, fired, no due process because they were assigned to cases this administration doesn't like. Do they fall into a specific kind of category? These cases they don't like?
Yes, they were cases that looked at the actions of the president. And so they don't like those cases. In truth, we were, the FBI was investigating and has for a long time investigated lots of public corruption cases. We
Republican and Democrat.
Republican and Democrat at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. In the same time frame, a year and a half or so, in which the indictments came out against President Trump. Indictments came out against Henry Cuellar and Bob Menendez, both sitting Democrats. All investigated by the same agency because that's our job. And that is what agents in the FBI and analysts in the FBI do every single day without fear or favor of any partisan interference.
What difference does it make to a field office or a field agent who's running the FBI? I mean, how much does that really matter?
I think that it makes a tremendous difference to be able to keep the experts focused on their investigations for the protection of the country, that we keep politics outside of the FBI. It's essential, really, to be able to do that work, especially in a public corruption setting, but also in a national security setting, because there are so many ways that foreign adversaries try to get at this nation.
So when President Trump in his first term fired FBI Director James Comey, he said the morale at the FBI was terrible and Comey was an awful leader. What's the morale like now from what you are able to detect about it?
Well, the morale is much worse, and I'll give you an example as to why. Picture a situation in which people who have dedicated their adult lives to the mission of the FBI, to defending the nation, are now working in an environment in which their colleagues have been fired simply for being assigned to the wrong case. That means everyone working in the FBI is wondering, am I going to get assigned to the wrong case?
What is the wrong case?
That's right. And trying to guess that works in both directions. One, I could be assigned to the wrong case. Two, I could refuse to open a case that is not warranted but is desired.
Right. Both things undermine what the FBI is supposed to be about.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And, you know, the FBI for many, many years has been very successful at carrying out both its criminal investigative work here in the U.S. and more broadly. There's certainly international criminal enterprises, and the FBI is well suited to investigate those, more so than an individual police department. And then also the FBI's national security mission, whether it relates to foreign corrupt practices or espionage or cyber attacks, those have been able to find continuity throughout administrations because the FBI has generally been insulated from that sort of interference.
Dave Sundberg, I appreciate you coming in. We'll note that you are a candidate for Congress, but that's not why you came in here, but I want to put that on the record. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
This show, fair to say, kind of addicted to the Texas primary. We're working through that by going to other primary states like Illinois tomorrow. Our political panel with a good reporter, Aaron Navarro, will discuss millions of dollars flowing into primaries there. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Voters are heading to the polls for primary elections in Illinois tomorrow, where there's been a lot of spending from outside groups, notably the Israeli Lobbying Committee, AIPAC, as well as artificial intelligence super PACs. I want to bring in our reporter panel to discuss. The senior editor at Notice, remember that's News of the U.S., Dave Leventhal, and White House reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, you put together a great memo for all of us here at CBS on what's going on in Illinois. Among the things that's going on in Illinois is kind of a road test of the endorsement power of the sitting governor, J.B. Pritzker.
It is a test of his status as a political power broker. He has endorsed his lieutenant governor, Juliana Stratton, who for months and for a majority of this race has been behind Congressman Rajna Krishnamurthy in the polls, is more than $20 million behind him when it comes to fundraising and ad support. And it looks like still that she has gotten enough momentum to make this a close race heading into tomorrow. And the question has really devolved into outside spending. And what is good outside spending? What is bad outside spending? Crypto PACs have spent over $10 million to back Krishnamurthy. Meanwhile, Pritzker has given at least $5 million. The word on the street is it's much more. To back a super PAC that is backing Stratton. I asked Stratton about kind of that discrepancy. This is what she told me this afternoon.
I want to just talk about values. We're talking about on supporting Congressman Krishnamurthy, our MAGA-aligned crypto industry folks who have started a super PAC to come after me. And on the other side, we're talking about a Democratic governor from the state of Illinois who has been working his entire life and certainly as governor to uplift every community across Illinois. And
Now, it's this question of, are there good billionaires? Are there bad billionaires? It's one Pritzker was asked over the weekend in the New York Times interview. It's a question that should he choose to run for president, he says he is
He's
not
going
considering
to get
it.
Right.
He's going to be asked that question a ton of times.
Of course he's going to get it.
And it's really finding its way in this Illinois Senate race.
Dave, what's your sense of Illinois? Do you have one?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have Democrats not only in the Senate race, but also in the different House races, and there are 4 open key seats there. They are low-key freaking out about the outside groups coming into their races in Democratic primaries, and also Democrats across the country watching this very closely, wondering, am I next?
Right.
And they're spending, in some cases, millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. The key question here, Major, is are these outside groups basically taking over partisan intramural Democratic primaries, and what does that mean for all the rest of them going up to September?
Exactly. And how does that put a party subject to these tensions and outside spending mechanisms pulling together and unifying going forward? It's an unresolved question, and Illinois will have a lot to say about it. I want to play for you and the audience sound from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, today, because he was asked in an event with President Trump about his attitude about the war with Iran and whether it differs, as the president has said himself on the record in public, from his. Listen.
We're trying to drive a wedge between members of the administration, between me and the president. What the president said consistently, going back to 2015, and I agreed with him, is that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We have taken this military action under the president's leadership. I think all of us, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, should pray for its success and pray for the safety of our troops. That's the approach that I've taken. Make it as successful as possible.
Make it as successful as possible doesn't necessarily mean I'm behind this 100%.
No, and if you also listen to
anyone parsing those words, anyone trying to read between the lines is like, he's not convinced.
He didn't look convinced and didn't sound convinced to many Americans who were listening to him say that, especially those who were paying attention to what J.D. Vance has said for years and years and years in the past, prior to him becoming the vice presidential nominee and ultimately vice president, but also to what Donald Trump has said about Iran over the years, and also more broadly about war in general. Let us not forget that in 2024, one of the big selling points for Donald Trump was that he was going to keep America out of foreign wars. Well, here we are.
And we were talking about kind of that money litmus test for the Democrats. On the Republican side, you're seeing some members of what's known as, the MAGA base criticize President Trump for starting this war with Iran. That puts J.D. Vance in a tricky spot. Does he side with the president more vocally, or does he try and play to that disgruntled base that he could potentially use should he choose to run in 2028?
And Marjorie Taylor Greene, while talking to CNN today, said she's talked to people in the administration who are not supportive of this war. Then she started to talk about J.D. Vance, and they said, well, are you talking about J.D. Vance? Well, not directly. I can't divulge any names, but a fair inference from listening to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's quite welcome on this program anytime, was it's J.D. Vance.
Right. And Vance at one point kind of tried to split the line. He said he essentially said that other past presidents that have gotten in prolonged wars are fools, and he thinks President Trump can be trusted to get this done. But at the same time, last Friday, he did not deny that he voiced his support against the prolonged campaign to the president. So it's a line that he continues to walk and will be asked about.
Aaron Navarro, I'm glad you're here with all that Illinois stuff, and Dave with your stuff on Illinois and the vice president. I appreciate you both very, very much. Next, the ProPublica report on why credit bureaus, are ignoring a growing number of consumer complaints with implications for their credit ratings. We'll talk about that next right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. There are lots of Americans right now who have artificially lower credit scores, and they're trying to get the reasons for their low credit scores resolved because they think there's some information that the credit bureaus should have that they're not responding to. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau used to help them in that. It's doing much less of that work now, and there's a reason why. According to a ProPublica analysis, several of these large credit bureaus are ignoring systematically these kinds of complaints. Joel Jacobs joins me now. He's a data reporter for ProPublica, and he's got lots of new reporting on this. Joel, explain this to my audience.
Well, thanks so much for having me. So the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, it operates a complaint system where basically consumers can come with their complaints, and then those complaints are forwarded to a company, and the CFPB requires those companies to respond. And more than 5 million complaints were lodged with the system last year. Far and away, the most common complaint is about credit reporting, and things like an error on a credit report, some mistake that somebody feels like should be fixed. And so folks showed the CFPB about this, and we took a look at the data, and what we found is that 2 of the 3 major credit bureaus, so Experian and TransUnion, have really dialed back how often they provide relief to many of these complaints, so make some kind of change. And to cite some figures, Experian provided around 20% of complaints with relief in 2024. That was down to less than 1% in 2025. TransUnion had 80 to 90% of complaints they were providing with relief, and that was down about half over the summer. And this really coincides with the Trump administration's effort to really just basically dismantle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
And there's one exception to this trend. It's another credit rating agency. Why are they the exception, and how are they the exception?
Right. So there is the third credit bureau, major credit bureau is Equifax, and we didn't see as much of a significant change there. Now they didn't say exactly why, but one notable thing is that the CFPB in the days before the Trump administration came back, the second Trump administration, the CFPB actually entered a consent order, had an enforcement action against Equifax. While it didn't specifically mention complaints, it was about this kind of broader dispute system. So when somebody goes and tries to, claim there's an error on their credit report, the credit bureaus are legally mandated to kind of do an investigation. And the CFPB had found that these investigations that Equifax was doing were basically somewhat superficial, right? They were ignoring documents, to the contrary. They were kind of dismissing disputes when they maybe shouldn't have. And one notable thing we found, though, is that TransUnion was actually going to be subject to potentially to a similar enforcement action. The CFPB had basically lined that up. There were settlement talks, but we found in SEC filings that basically soon after the change in administrations, that enforcement action was dropped.
So when there was a robust,
the settlement talks were paused.
Right. So when there was a robust push right before the new Trump administration came in, that yielded something that has benefited consumers. And then since then, the other 2 who were untouched by that robust enforcement have peeled back. I want to read something that came from your article. The companies have successfully, for years rather, let me start here. For years, the CFPB's complaint system has served as a public middleman, forwarding consumer issues to the bureaus, requiring responses, and publishing data showing how companies handled them. But the companies have successfully lobbied the Trump administration to start steering some consumers away from the transparent process and toward their internal systems. 30 seconds, summarize what this means.
Yeah, so basically the credit bureaus say that many of these complaints are more or less frivolous, they're illegitimate, that consumers should be coming directly to the credit bureaus. But it's a much less transparent process when they do that. They don't publish data about how often people get help. And as I noted, there has been an enforcement action, and the CFPB has found that those internal efforts are not effective.
Joel Jacobs, ProPublica, I appreciate it very much. Coming up, a tale of 2 passions. Bob Crawford is best known as the bassist for the Avett Brothers. He's also the author of a biography about the political career of John Quincy Adams. That's next. Welcome back. Musician, podcast host, now biographer. The bassist from the Avett Brothers, his name is Bob Crawford. The subject of his book, The 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams. Here is part of our conversation about that book, America's Founding Son. Is there anyone more fascinating across the span of American history than John Quincy Adams?
There is not.
There isn't, honestly.
No, because we think about, look, you want to rise to the top. We're taught to ascend to the top of whatever profession or whatever sport we're playing. Everybody wants to be the best. Everybody wants to, as Springsteen once said in an outtake, everybody wants to be the man on top. But what John Quincy Adams teaches us is public service is the key, is the essence of this democracy. And so he ascends to the presidency, has a failed one-term presidency, and he goes to Congress. He serves for 18 years. And it's there that he defines himself as a man and as a politician.
And there's like 100 years where John and John Quincy Adams are central to the entire American evolutionary political experience.
Absolutely. John Quincy Adams, is appointed to his first diplomatic post by George Washington.
That's right.
Probably his hero. Probably more of a hero than his own father.
His own father, right?
Right. He was a complete fanboy for George Washington. He names his oldest son, George Washington Adams. But then he serves in Congress with a young Abraham Lincoln. And so JQA, seriously, he touches the Revolution, he touches the Civil War. He's the man standing in the gap.
Exactly. And his career exemplifies something that I don't think people who think about modern America and the modern American presidency can appreciate. At the time he went back to the House, yes, that was a step down, but Congress was still considered more powerful than the president.
Article 1, Major.
Yes.
Article 1.
Article 1, let's go.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, his son, Charles Francis Adams, you know, he's going into Congress. He's like, Dad, you can't do this. You can't go into Congress. It's a demotion. But no, you know, think about this. You've got 2 terms for Monroe. You got 1 term for JQA. You've got 2 terms for Jackson. And then you have a series of 1-term presidents all the way to Lincoln.
All the way to Lincoln.
And so the presidency, yes, Andrew Jackson expands the reach of executive power.
No doubt.
To the point where it terrified half the country into forming a coalition called the Whig Party to counteract him. But Congress and the Senate, by and far, Article 1 was the more powerful branch of the 3 branches.
And after Andrew Jackson's presidency, you had this series of 1-term mediocrities, rendered mediocre by their inability to figure out what to do about the central question of the future of the American experiment, slavery.
Right.
And John Quincy Adams, while in the House, flows through that entire arc of history.
Yeah, and that's where he makes his turn as a person, as a man. We love our TV shows. We're living in the golden age of television. They say the second golden age of television, because we love characters.
Typified by this program.
Absolutely. And typified by characters who make these turns. And Adams does that, right? When he's president, he is the establishment. He is really a part of his father's generation.
Right, the old guard.
While you have this wild, unwieldy populist democracy rising throughout the country, typified by Andrew Jackson and his Democratic Party. But it's the issue of slavery that will define Adams in Congress. Because at the time, the anti-slavery movement was beginning to gain some momentum. They were called abolitionists. They were radicals. They were Christian. Many of them were women. And they were stirring the pot in the North, and they were disrupting the status quo, which gained them a lot of hostility. One of the ways they tried to get their message out was through sending petitions to Congress.
That they would be read.
That they would be read, because the First Amendment, we petition our government
for redress of grievances.
Yes. And so they couldn't go on the internet and send their congressman an email. They couldn't visit his local office, right?
They couldn't even go on the telegraph wire, because that didn't exist either.
It didn't exist yet. So, but what they would do is they would literally send a petition praying for the end of slavery in Washington, D.C. And Adams, he would get up there and he would read these petitions. And he was one of the few congressmen who would.
You can listen to the rest of my conversation with Bob Crawford, and it is really a cavalcade of early American history on your favorite podcast platform. Happy Monday, everyone. This is The Takeout, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report is next.